Good morning. Welcome to this worship service for First Parish Church of Kingston, Massachusetts. I am the Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennyson. I serve this church as its minister. I use she, her pronouns, and I come to you today from the ancestral lands of the Patuxet Wampanoag people. I send my greetings and my respect to the elders of the Wampanoag folks who still gather in community to live and to worship and to be a part of the world and the ecosystems and this human community. This morning, we have a service for you that will be led with Linda Loring as the worship associate and Jen Shattuck, our director of family ministry. So as we begin, I'm going to pass it over to Linda for the chalice lighting and invite you to light your chalices along with us at home.
We light our chalices today with these words from John Gibb Millspaw. Leave aside little thoughts that distract you, for this place, like all places, is a holy place, and now, like all times, is a holy time. Join with this community of seekers, and together, let us find.
Thank you, Linda. We have an opening hymn to share. It is number 124, Be That Guide, and it is recorded for us this weekend by Kara Roth. You are invited to sing along, to make up harmonies, to hum, or simply to listen, whatever is best for you today.
Be that guide whom love sustains, rise above the daily strife, lift on high the good you find, help to heal the hurts of life. Be that helper nothing daunts, doubt of friend or taunt of foe, ever strive for liberty, show the path that life should go. Be that builder trusting good, bitter though the test may be, through all ages they are right, though they build in agony. Be that teacher faith directs, move beyond the old frontier, though the fright and fear that faith be tomorrow's pioneer.
My gratitude to Kara and Tony for recording that for us. Jen Shattuck has a time for all ages for us to share.
Hi all, it's so good to see you as always and to be here together. Hopefully soon we will be able to be together in person. Until then, I am here to talk about habits. Raise your hand if you have some things that you do every day without having to think too much about that. I see hands. Can people do that again for me? I had to switch my screen. Yes? So many people, almost everyone. I invite you to put those in the chat if you would. What are some things that you do every day without having to think too much about those things? I see brushing teeth, making coffee. If I had to bet, I would say that those are habits that many people who are present today have. a prayer habit, a dishwashing habit. Yep. So we eat, we nourish ourselves, we care for our homes, we energize ourselves. And we know that habits are really good for these things. The official definition of a habit is a skillfully routinized manner of action or thought. And about 40% of the things that human beings do every day are habitual or skillfully routinized. We can see that in the chat. We are doing these things that help to keep us safe and clean and energized and organized. But habits can also help us stay happier when times are hard. Research says that if you've built habits related to certain areas of life, if you have been intentional about certain areas, you're likely to have a better experience of life. The fancy way to say that is that you will have increased your subjective well-being. You'll just feel better and more satisfied. So I have an equation. This is a little bit about math, believe it or not. I have an equation from the social psychologist Arthur C. Brooks that Monica has to share. So this is an equation that teaches us how to increase our subjective well-being. It turns out our intentionality matters a lot when it comes to well-being. And Arthur C. Brooks, the social psychologist, says that if we have habits in these areas, faith, family, friends, work, if we have taken the time to intentionally be in relationships with others, to spend time thinking about the big questions of life, and to be of service to others, we will be happier and more satisfied. Our subjective well-being will be good. And here's some great news. We are doing that. We are already doing that together here today. If you're here, it's probably because you have been intentional about being here. You have chosen to be here. You've made a decision. You've kind of built that church muscle, that community muscle that allows you, you looked at your clock, you said, oh, it's 10:20. I better go grab that Zoom link. That has become habitual for you. And although we think about habits as being not very conscious, or if we do things habitually, they must not be meaningful. This equation tells us that the things we do habitually, intentionally, really do matter. And you may have seen that over the course of the pandemic. If you had regular Zoom calls or porch sits with friends or family, you took the time to be intentional about your relationships. If you have been studying and working for justice, you've been asking yourself the big questions. Why am I here? How can I make life better for others? We are doing these things already, and bringing that lens to our life can help us live better. We'll hear more about that later in the sermon, but right now, Linda has a reading for us from Mark Nepo.
Our reading today comes from the work of Mark Nepo, an American poet and philosopher. Mana is a term used, originally used in Polynesian and Melanesian cultures to describe an extraordinary power or force residing in a person or object, a sort of spiritual electricity that charges anyone who touches it. Carl Jung later defined the term as the unconscious influence of one being on another. What Jung speaks to is the fact that the energy of being real has more power than outright persuasion, debate, or force of will. He suggests that being who we are always releases an extraordinary power that without intent or design affects the people who come in contact with such realness. The beautiful and simple truth of this can be seen in looking at the sun. The sun, without intent or will or plan or sense of principle, just shines thoroughly and constantly. By itself, by being itself, the sun warms with its light, never withholding or warming only certain things of the earth. Rather, the sun emanates in all directions all the time, and things grow. In the same way, when we are authentic, expressing our warmth and light in all directions, we cause things around us to grow. When our souls, like little suns, express the light of who we are, we emanate what Jesus called love and what Buddha called compassion, and the roots of community lengthen. In this way, without any intent to shape others, we simply have to be authentic, and a sense of mana, of spiritual light and warmth, will emanate from our very souls, causing others to grow. Not toward us, but toward the light that moves through us. In this way, by being who we are, we not only experience life in all its vitality, but quite innocently and without design, we help others to be more thoroughly themselves. In being real, in staying devoted to this energy of realness, we help each other grow toward the one vital light.
Thank you, Linda, for that reading. We have another hymn to share. This one is number 194, Faith is a Forest, recorded for us by Kathy Kay and Tony Carlin. Again, you are invited to sing, to hum, to listen, whatever is right for you this morning.
Faith is a forest in which doubts play and hide. Insight can hear the still small voice deep inside. Web of life, may this thread I weave, strength and commitment to all I believe. Vision be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say. Seeds of both meek and strong are scattered in air. Dignity shines undimmed by bigotry's glare. Web of life, may this thread I weave. Help me bear witness to all I believe. Justice be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say. Fortune and famine ride the swift winds of chance. Sorrow and pleasure seem united in dance. Web of life, may this thread I weave. Mingle compassion with all I believe. Mercy be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say.
I love the hymns in our hymnal that call on each of us to be intentional and to be channels for things like justice and mercy in the world. Singing them is part of my practice of intentionality. So Jen shared with us some advice from Arthur Brooks, an Atlantic columnist who started a column on happiness just, he notes, as the pandemic was changing all of our lives a year ago. How to Build a Life is the official title of his column. And we looked at one of the happiness equations he offered in the very first column. This one that teaches us the value of intentionally cultivating balance in our habits and choosing to live lives that are of service to others. In that same article, Brooks lifts up another equation. He says, satisfaction equals what you have divided by what you want. And the secret to satisfaction is to focus on the denominator of the equation. Do not obsess about your haves, manage your wants instead. Don't count your possessions or your money, power, prestige, romantic partners, or fame and try to figure out how to increase them. Instead, make an inventory of your worldly desires and try to decrease them. Make a bucket list, not of exotic vacations and expensive stuff, but a list of the attachments in your life that you need to discard, and make a plan to do that. The fewer wants there are screaming inside your brain and dividing your attention, the more peace and satisfaction will be left for what you already have. So in other words, Brooks asks us to be intentional about what we give our focus to. If you focus on all the things it's possible for you to want, and there are many things it's possible to want, right? Then you will pretty much always be dissatisfied. Much better to figure out which are the important things that you want. And we have an expansive definition of things here. So I have been thinking about this in my own life in this way. I have wanted to go to New Zealand for a long time, but I'm not sure that I ever will. It's hard to justify to myself that I could go on a trans-Pacific trip across an entire ocean purely for my own self-indulgent wanting in this age of accelerating climate change. Because when I examine my wants, it turns out that what I want more than to go to New Zealand is to live a life in which my actions are deeply aligned with my values. So Brooks would suggest I should let go of the want to travel to New Zealand and hold on to the want to live a life that feels deeply respectful of the earth. Now we can do this with the wants we have that are about who we are, as well as the wants about what we have or what we might do. In many places and contexts, we get messages about who we're supposed to be. I want to be someone cool. I want to be someone fun. I want to be someone tough, and so on. Now, what if we don't feel particularly cool or fun or tough in certain situations? What if who I am is someone who likes doing something unpopular? No less a person than Dolly Parton, a white American woman, a famous singer, someone who has come in for her share of pressure to be a certain way or not be a certain way. Dolly Parton, who has a lot of pithy wisdom, these little sayings that sum up how she keeps herself centered and who she really is, has some wisdom to share with us. For example, Dolly Parton has platinum blonde hair, and people have made a lot of dumb blonde jokes about her. She says, I'm not offended by all the dumb blonde jokes because I know I'm not dumb. And I also know I'm not really blonde. My favorite piece of advice from Dolly is find out who you are, then do it on purpose. Now we can turn to another famous American woman because I watched an interview that Jane Fonda did recently with Harper's Bazaar. And through the magic of the internet, I can in fact play you part of the video in which Jane shares some of her wisdom for living. We will see if YouTube will cooperate, but I am optimistic that it will.
My life got better mid-70s. I mean, youth is hard. Youth is hard. What am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to know? I'm supposed to commit myself to something, but I don't know what. You know, it's all unanswered questions. The longer you live, the more, it's like, I've been there, done that. Well, I've hit bottom and I've survived. So, you know, you separate the wheat from the shaft. You learn not to make mountains out of molehills. It's called wisdom. You tend to get wiser. I mean, in a way, you have to work at it. You have to very intentionally learn from the events in your life, especially from your mistakes. That's what you learn from. But I do a lot of reading, and I learn a tremendous amount from what I read. I'm a student, which is why I feel always that I'm the youngest person in the room, even though I'm usually the oldest. And I hope I die feeling that way. I can tell you this, in my 20s, I was ancient. I was so old in my 20s. And now, even though my body hurts like hell, I feel very youthful. It's because I know why I'm here. But here's another thing. This is a bit of wisdom. I was married to Ted Turner when I turned 59. I was out with about a dozen cowboys rounding up bison on one of his ranches in New Mexico. And on the way back to headquarters in the back of the truck with the cowboys, I thought, oh, next year I'm gonna be 60. 60, that's the beginning of the end. There's the first 30 years and the second set of 30 years and then 60, and then there's the last 30 years. I did not know how I wanted to live out the last act of my life. I realized in order to figure that out, where I was supposed to go, I had to know where I'd been. And so for 1 year, I very intentionally researched myself as though I was somebody else, as though I had to write about this person, Jane Fonda. By the time I turned 60, here were the things that I realized. First of all, what I had not known, that I'm brave. I didn't know that. I realized that I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm afraid of having regrets. I'm afraid of getting to the end of my life with regrets when it's too late to do anything about it. So I thought, well, what you have to do then, you have to live the last part of your life in such a way that when you get to the end, you won't have any regrets anymore. See, the more you can be intentional about how you're living, the better. You can't make your life longer, but you can make it deeper. And the way you make it deeper is by being intentional. And so that was the guide for the last 30 years, although now I think it's more like 40 years, now that I'm already in my almost to my end of my third act. I kind of know how to live now.
I do enjoy that the internet is full of wisdom from folks and we can learn from them. And I love what Jane Fonda says about researching herself and discovering that she is a brave person and that her real fear is about having regrets. I love what she says about living intentionally. And like the reading we heard from Mark Nepo, when we are our authentic selves, a kind of spiritual light and warmth shines forth from us. And the world certainly needs people who are intentionally, authentically themselves. People who can emanate spiritual light and warmth, who can do as our hymn says, and let justice and mercy speak through them. Because it has been a heartbreaking week of gun violence in America. And I am so sad today to be naming the death of another Black American killed by a police officer during a traffic stop in Brooklyn Center, a Minneapolis suburb. And I know my sadness is nothing compared to the sadness of the people who knew and loved Dante Wright. I am so sad to be naming the death of Adam Toledo, a Latino American boy who was killed last month by a police officer in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, known locally as La Villita. I know the local name for the neighborhood because when I was in seminary, I went to La Villita with my classmates. We took a walking tour of the neighborhood with teenage guides from a community environmental organization. We learned about the park the neighborhood now has, which is constructed on top of a Superfund site, but has been made a community space. We walked through a beautiful community garden and we met folks and learned about their work. This small overlap that connects a little piece of my life to this neighborhood is nothing compared to the connections that weave a web of all the people who knew and loved Adam Toledo. But this little piece also reminds me that we are all connected one way or another. And so I grieve the loss of these lives I did not know. In thinking about intentionality this week, and in thinking about the ongoing struggle with gun violence in this country, I have been thinking and learning about the way police officers are often trained in the United States. What might build habits that would make someone pull a gun without pausing to think about it? And I have read about training programs where officers are continually reminded to keep a hand near their gun. What is put into muscle memory deeper than conscious evaluation is the reaction to pull a gun and to shoot. I have been learning that often folks who are military veterans become police officers. 1 in 5 police officers is a veteran, often someone who has served in a literal war zone. And I have been wondering how much time and intentionality goes into helping veterans adjust from combat zones to city patrols. And of course, I have been thinking about intentionality for this service, which started out with the idea of an exploration of how we can each make choices that support happy, satisfying, meaningful lives. So I have been holding all these things this week. And I started remembering an episode of a TV show called Flashpoint. Flashpoint was a Canadian show, one focused on the work of a special police unit that does strategic response, a team that deals with hostage situations, bombs, high-risk arrest warrants, that sort of situation. And maybe you know about me that I love Canadian TV. I love the way I will be watching it and I will suddenly run into a different assumption about how the world works. So this week, I keep remembering this episode of Flashpoint where the team is in a dangerous standoff and they know that their protocols are very clear. They use force only when it is necessary to protect life. They find themselves in this standoff where a vigilante appears with a gun and tries to shoot the criminal that the team is currently confronting. And they find themselves shooting the vigilante to stop that loss of life. The team argues about this during their debrief. One officer says, you know, that criminal was a bad guy. We should have let the vigilante person shoot him. And the team leader says, that is not how it works. We are not judges. We are cops. We don't get to wing it. We don't get to choose which rules we're going to follow. That's what the bad guys do. What we do is we serve the law. And I hear in that line from that TV show an intentionality that feels important to me. A focus on paring away all the other actions a person might take to focus in on the deepest commitments. I want this for our country. I want systems and structures and trainings that lift up the protect and serve mission of our police and that pare away the reactions that much too often kill people, especially Black and brown people. I know that I am not alone in wanting that intentionality. In preparing for this sermon, I found a piece by Sergeant Jeremiah Johnson of the Darien, Connecticut Police Department, a white officer who has written what he calls a Hippocratic Oath for policing. The Hippocratic Oath is the one taken by doctors, which is commonly summed up as, first, do no harm. The actual text of the oath speaks to thoughtfully, intentionally practicing medicine to maximize the chances of doing good and to minimize the chances of doing harm. And in Sergeant Johnson's version of this oath, he has written, I will respect the humanity of those whom I encounter, both victim and suspect alike. I will treat life as sacrosanct and will only use deadly physical force as a last resort. If I must employ deadly force, I will strive to preserve life once it has been applied. It is far past time for us to look at American policing and to research it the way a 59-year-old Jane Fonda researched herself, so that we can deal honestly with the truth. It is far past time for our society to confront the bias that shows up far too often in policing, to pay attention to who gets arrested without being harmed and who is perceived as dangerous and is injured or killed. It is time for all of us to call for intentionality that holds all human life sacrosanct. I wish that we lived in a world where I had gotten to simply preach about how each of us might make intentional choices for our own happiness and satisfaction. But that is not the week that we have had in this country. And for my deepest commitments, the ones I want to be true to, I require myself to name what I believe needs to change. This too is a way of knowing who I am and what life requires of me. May that knowing be so for each of us. May we ground ourselves in who and how we are called to be for the liberation and the flourishing of us all. May we live so that the light the world needs shines from each of us. May it be so. We have some special music to share for our offertory. I'm going to pass it over to Linda to introduce the offering, and then I will bring up that video.
At this time in our service, we pause to receive an offering. Part of knowing ourselves and being who we are is knowing what gifts we have to give. Acts of generosity and giving are one important way of expressing the truth that who we are and how we show up matters. Online giving information is available in your email order of service, along with links for online pledging. Please know that whatever you give will be most gratefully received.
I have to admit, I forgot to put the links for online pledging in your order of service, so I will put those in the chat. It is pledge season here at First Parish, and the finance and budget committees do need your pledges to be able to make the budget. So I will put those in the chat. What I have to share with you now is a recording from a singer-songwriter named Leah Morris, who was inspired by Amanda Gorman's powerful poem at the inauguration in January, and who has generously made her recordings available for churches to use in worship. Enjoy.
Hey, you guys, Leah here. So I must be among millions, if not billions of people who tuned in to the inauguration yesterday on January 20th, 2021. And I was inspired by every moment of it, but especially wrapped and lifted, exalted, just completely fixated and moved by Amanda Gorman's poem, her presence, her beauty, her artistry. And so this song was born. there is always a light. When we are ready to see it, there is always a light. When we are ready to be it, to see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night, to climb this hill, together we will. There is always your light in the dark. We are ready to see it. There is always your light in the dark. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always your light. There is always light. We are ready to see it. There is always your light. There is always light. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always light. There is always light. There is always light. There is always light. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a climb this hill. Together we will. There is always shine your light. There is always shine. There is always shine your light. There is always shine. Be the light.
I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. Linda has our chalice extinguishing words for this morning.
We extinguish our chalices today with these words from Sarah York. We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown.
Thank you all for being here this morning. I am going to stop the recording so we can move into a time of sharing our joys and sorrows with each other.